Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Sarah Payton with NCPMI. Today's webinar is part of the Let's Talk webinar series, and today's topic is What Works? Reducing Suspensions and Disproportionality, the Pyramid Model, presented by Dr. Rosemary Allen. Welcome, Dr. Allen.
Thank you so much. I am so excited about our topic today and about our esteemed panelists. I would like to start with having them introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. With us today, we have Ashley Lofties and Raquel Lima. Jump right in, Ashley.
Hi, my name is Ashley Lofties. I am a school counselor at Cambridge Early Learning Center in Metro Nashville Public Schools. We are an all pre-K center. We have 4 in the district, and I support 2 of those. I also support Casa Asafran Early Learning Center. I was first introduced to the pyramid model while I was working as a mental health consultant for Denver Great Kids Head Start in 2008, and I fell in love with it, and I've tried to integrate it into my practice ever since then. I was really lucky to be able to participate in the Pyramid Equity Project along with Raquel and her school just a couple years ago, and here I am today.
Thank you so much. Raquel, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As Dr. Allen said, my name is Raquel Lima. I work for the Clifton Early Learner Academy in Clifton, New Jersey. Our preschool is part of the Clifton Public School System, and we are a partnership with Head Start. So currently I work as a classroom coach. I work with 3- and 4-year-old classrooms and classroom teachers on implementing pyramid model in the classroom and program-wide. Like Ashley, I was very fortunate enough to be included as part of the Pyramid Equity Project. So my center, myself, and colleagues received direct training from the NCPMI staff on program-wide implementation of the pyramid model. And it has changed our program dramatically. It's been nothing but a positive and wonderful experience.
That is awesome, and we are looking forward to both of you sharing your experiences with us. The Pyramid Equity Project was a 2-year project where we focused on equity and culturally responsive practices that's already included in the pyramid model, but we highlighted those practices and were very, very intentional. And as a result, developed a few products around that. So today we're going to talk about what works and talk about some of those lessons that we've learned through the Pyramid Equity Project. But before we get started, I would like to just make sure we're all on the same page in our definitions. And first, let's talk about suspensions. What are suspensions? And one of the best definitions that I've seen is where they define suspension as a disciplinary action that requires a child to absent him or herself from the learning environment for a specified period of time due to challenging behaviors in the classroom. And also I'd like to talk about disproportionality, because today we're going to talk about how we reduce suspensions and disproportionality. And disproportionality occurs when one group is either overrepresented or underrepresented in a particular situation or category that compared to the percentage of that group in general society. So when we talk about suspensions and disproportionality, I do want to say that we're talking about what administrators and teachers, superintendents report as suspensions. We know that suspensions occur in other areas. For instance, sending a child home early, excluding a child from the learning process, sending them to another classroom, telling parents that the program is not a good fit, modifying their schedule, putting them on a shortened day. So those are ways that students are included, but the data that I'm going to share with you does not capture those, what we call soft suspensions. So we're talking about reported suspensions in our data. And what we know is that every single day, we see instances of at least 250 children who are suspended from their early childhood programs across all settings. That's 250 children preschool children every single day. And we have to be concerned about that. In 2006, Dr. Walter Gilliam showed that preschoolers are suspended 3 times more than kindergartners through 12th graders. And these are only preschoolers who are in state-funded preschool. If we count child care centers, then that number grows astronomically. In 2014, we received our first data collection that showed the number of preschool children who were suspended once, who were suspended for a second time, those who were expelled, and those who received corporal punishment. And it showed patterns of racial and gender disparities. It showed one, that boys are suspended, and they're suspended a lot. And they showed that African-American children at that point were 19% of the preschool population, but 48% of those who were suspended. 2 years later, we received a new data collection set. And that showed that, again, boys were suspended a lot. They were 54% of the preschool population, but 78% of those who were suspended. And African-American preschoolers were nearly 4 times more likely to be suspended than their white friends. Additionally, and this was very concerning, the data showed that African-American girls, they were only 20% of the preschool population of females, but 54% of those who are suspended are expelled. And we also know, based on state level data, that our youngest children are being suspended and expelled. For instance, in Illinois, 40% of child care providers reported that they suspended infants and toddlers. And when we look at infants, an infant is a child that's not yet turned 1. And a toddler is a child who's not yet turned 3 years old. So these numbers should really be galvanizing our resolve to keep children in school, and to really address the disparities that exist in who gets to stay and who's asked to leave. So as we're talking about this, I'd like for us to consider the racial disparities that occur, and to for our panelists to tell us how the pyramid model addresses not only suspensions, but the disparities. So Ashley, tell us a little bit about your implementation of the pyramid model, really focusing on equity and seeing things through a racial and gender lens.
Yes. So our school is located in South Nashville, which is in the Antioch area, which is a very diverse area of Nashville, Tennessee. We are lucky to have kids from all over the world at our school. We have children from the Middle East, we have children from Africa, we have children from South America, Asia, and of course, Tennessee in the United States. So it's been really, really exciting to be working here. I think that one thing I've really liked about the pyramid model is that it really intentionally focuses on training that's related to implicit bias. It was really helpful to our staff, and I think most of us were aware that implicit bias exists, but it really allowed us to understand how it can affect our practices in the day-to-day. Another thing that has been really great about pyramid model is it's just been, it has culturally responsive practices, which are believed to reduce disparity, of course, and it's embedded at every level. And I really like that because even on the universal supports, I feel it's really very critical. Mm-hmm. And Rosemary, here, did you want me to talk a little bit about our school and some very specific examples?
Absolutely. I think our participants would love to hear examples.
Wonderful. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the diversity at our school and how we've had to just look at some examples about how implicit bias might be affecting things. So one thing that was a little bit new to me is we noticed that we had a lot of our male students who were coming from overseas. Most of them had been born overseas. Some were born here to parents who had come very recently. And they were coming from households where they simply had never been expected to wait or take turns or do things very independently on their own. Even when it came to, hanging up their coat, walking in rather than being carried in, fed, and these are 4-year-olds, feeding their own self breakfast, this kind of thing. So for us, it was a really eye-opening experience to not look at that as it was something wrong or there was a problem with it. And just because it wasn't the way we saw it, we had to really kind of step back and see that it was just a different mindset than we had. Another factor that I should mention with this is the male-female thing, because we were seeing this with the boys, but we weren't seeing it with the girls in the same family. They would be a lot more independent, a lot more self-sufficient, clean up after themselves, sometimes clean up after the boys. So with working with you all, it was a really great experience to, like I said, just kind of shift our mindset and see that they were coming from a different mindset. It didn't mean it was right or wrong, but really looked at it as an opportunity to a kind of a teachable moment for the kids. And step back and not have that initial, oh, I'm so offended as a female professional response, but to have it like, oh, okay, this is a way for me to teach these kids how things might work in school, how things might be a little bit different in public school here in Tennessee. So it was really great to look at it as an opportunity to work with the kids to develop independence, whether that came to hanging their own backpack or cleaning up their own toys and things like that. So I looked at it as a teaching of pro-social, cooperative, in self-sufficient skills. So that was really, really unique.
And actually, it's wonderful that you were able to first practice what we call cultural humility, to learn about the practices of your families. And I know what you didn't say also is that you worked very closely with your families to understand the culture and the reasons why, without really judging, but tell me more about this and tell me more about that. And I noticed firsthand how you respected the families and their cultures, and the negotiating that took place as you began to establish rules, as you began to understand those cultural roles, and then to negotiate what it looks like at home and what it looks like at school. And I think that made all the difference in the world. It was also amazing that that your children, of course, your school is a community school. Yes. So the students live right there in the community, as does many of the teachers.
Yes.
So, yes, tell us a little bit about that.
That was another really important aspect, I think, that you just brought up with getting to know the teachers. And we were very lucky that our principal, we opened 4 years ago, and she was very intentional in her hiring practices. She wanted to have a staff that reflected what the community looked like. So that was amazing. We have 4 or 5 languages spoken by the staff members at our school. So that's fantastic. And she was very intentional about hiring as many languages as she could that would be representative of the community. So we have staff members that speak Arabic, Kurdish, Spanish, of course, Nepali. We have quite a few students from Nepal. And so that's been really, really helpful.
Yes,
To try to have the staff to reflect the students as much as we can. The breakdown of our students I was looking at a little earlier today. This year we have 76 Black or African American students, and that includes many, many students from Africa. 55 white students. That is almost primarily students that are from the Middle East. And 4 Asian students and only 4 students that are 2 or more races. So that's kind of what our breakdown looks like, but it's a little bit deceiving when you just look at the numbers. You see, oh, there's about, 55 white kids, and yes, but they are coming from not what you expect culture-wise. A lot of them are coming from overseas in the Middle East.
Very interesting, thank you. So one of the things that we know is one of the factors that lead to disproportionate discipline is implicit bias. Or an implicit bias around gender, it can be about race. And with the pyramid model, one of the key components is the collection of data. So can you talk a little bit about the tools that we use to collect data on implicit bias? Raquel, can you lead that for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The tools that NCPMI have created, specifically the BIR, the Behavior Incident Reporting System, really allows us to look at behavior objectively. It also really informs our planning. So I can start with where you can access the incident report system. Just to go back a little bit, this is really helpful for our program. Right now, we're 21 four-year-old classrooms, so it's a pretty large size program. When we add our three-year-old classrooms in, we're up to 28 classrooms. So as a coach, knowing what's happening where and when things are happening and when we need to observe, visit, the behavior incident report system really helps me personally as a coach to guide how I can support my teachers. And NCPMI has made so many resources available through their website. The Behavior Incident Report System, the BIR, is available for free on the website. If you look here on the screen, it will give you a direct link where anyone can go online and be able to access all the information. So in that system, there's a few different pieces. And if we just go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about what it includes. So the first thing in the third box, it says Behavior Incident Report Instructions. So a behavior incident report is essentially the teacher's way or a classroom staff member's way of documenting when an incident of challenging behavior were to occur. And when we talk about challenging behavior, we talk about things that are not typical of 3 or 4-year-old behavior if we're talking about preschoolers. So if it was something that was a behavior that was not easily redirected, even with the teachers trying to redirect, if it became a physical aggression where a child might have been physically aggressive with a staff member or with a peer, that would warrant a behavior incident report. So we, in this package, the form is included and the form breaks down more information about the behavior that happened. So it looks like this. So if there was something that were to happen in a classroom, a teacher would be encouraged to document it using the BIR report form. One thing that we really stressed with our teachers is filling out a BIR is in no way a reflection of your teaching capacity or your capability. You're filling out a BIR just signaling to your support team that something has happened in your classroom. It may or may not need further planning, collaborative planning. So we really tried to stress with our staff that no one is judging you if you fill out a BIR form. Children, 3 and 4-year-olds, they have behavior because they've only been with us on this planet for 3 to 4 years. They're learning. They're especially learning social skills, which we know a lot of our students come in with varying skills, varying abilities, varying exposure. So if there was something that a teacher did need to document, they would just check off problem behavior. They would only select one. What activity did it happen? Now this is really important because sometimes we see it's always during meal times. So if we have BIRs recorded, several BIRs for meal times, as a coach, when I'm having a conversation with my teacher, I'm gonna say, all right, I might come in, let's plan a visit during mealtime, let's see what it looks like. We had one situation last year that there was behavior around mealtime, and then after having that conversation with the family, we came to find out that the family never sat for family style meals, and that the child was being fed. So the child in the classroom having a considerably hard time at the table, asking people to pass things and being able to get his needs met when that was something that they never practiced before. So the BIR let us identify when these things were happening. It was a great opportunity to start a conversation with the family, to gather more information, and then to put a plan in place that the teacher would be teaching those skills at school, and then the family would support us at home doing the same thing. They felt that that was a common goal they had, they wanted their child to be successful in the classroom during mealtime, and they were willing to work on that at his home too and change their style a little bit. And then from our end, we were able to have a different perspective. We weren't seeing this as challenging behavior. We were seeing this child just never had the opportunity to practice. So again, like Ashley said, it helped us identify a teachable moment.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we find the form, so teachers would fill out the form, that would be step one, and then our data entry person would input the data, and then we would get graphs back to kind of give us a little bit more information and help us guide our planning a little bit more. So on this slide, you will see this is one of the graphs that the Excel BIR workbook is capable of generating. So this one shows the percent of BIRs by activity for a classroom. So in this classroom, you can see 27% of challenging behavior is happening during centers or indoor play. So what does that tell us? Right, that might be a time to go in to observe, have a conversation, a reflexive conversation with the teacher. What's happening during centers? Why are we seeing challenging behavior? Is it because the children don't have the play skills? Are those incidents happening when peers are playing freely and now they need a little bit more support and direct teaching on how to play cooperatively? So it really gives us information on how we can be preventative, what we can teach or what skills need to be taught in the classroom. And then again, if we know what we're teaching, we'll know where we need to reinforce students so they continue that positive behavior.
Wonderful. Raquel, we have a question from Meredith, and she's asking, how do you support training and sustainable implementation of the BIR?
Okay, Meredith, that's a great question. Included in the BIR training instructions is a link to a webinar. It's about a 20-minute video clip where it gives you all the definitions of the challenging behavior. It's a very short training, but after staff members view that training, they have all the information that they need to actually fill out a BIR themselves. There's actually on-the-spot training in that video where you would look at a video clip and be able to practice filling out a BIR. So we have our staff members watch that video yearly. And new staff members that join us, we ask that they have that 20 minutes and complete the training as well.
We do the same.
Wonderful. Well, Ashley, you've used the BIR. What aspects have you found to be most helpful? And what aha moments did you have with this?
I would say that for me, the BIRs have been extremely helpful in allowing us to identify trends in challenging behavior. And by trends, I mean school-wide, classroom-specific, and child-specific. So not only can we dig deep and see and identify when and how a specific child is struggling, but we can also see when and how specific teachers or teaching teams may be struggling or need a little extra support in certain areas too. Whether that's classroom management, transitions, responses to challenging behavior, something like that. School-wide, the BIR data helped us to enable us to know, and it did, and it continues to help us to know what kinds of social, emotional, or behavioral professional development opportunities can we bring in for the staff? What would be useful to the staff as a whole? What issues are we currently dealing with as a whole and might be most relevant, and what issues may need some further support? So I found on those 3 levels, it's been really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I love what the sharing that you and Raquel are giving us. And I'm thinking back to what Raquel said about mealtime and really looking at what's happening during mealtime and then being very responsive. That was such a culturally responsive response to finding out what's happening to that child at mealtime. Have you found that because the BIR gives such specific information, have you been able to drill down to like what's happening in the block area, if you have more incidents there, or what's happening outside? Can you give us any examples, both of you, about using the BIRs and some of that really specific data?
Sure. I have one that I think was really interesting. Our very first year that we started working with the BIRs and with the pyramid equity model, we noticed something very unique. So as a school, as you mentioned, we kind of went along with that trend of boys were receiving more BIRs. But when we drilled it down to specific classrooms, we found one classroom where actually girls were disproportionately receiving BIRs. And that was very interesting. And it was not something that I would have ever expected to see in the data. But it really helped us to be able, the coach and I, to be able to focus on kind of changing our practices and working with the teacher to identify that was going on, which was of course very clear in the data, but also to develop prevention strategies, to develop kind of examine why. It turns out that she had a very high expectation of herself, and had just this in mind that girls are more self-regulated. Girls are, able to hold this together and that together easier than boys. So it's easier for girls to sit. It's easier for girls to raise their hand, that kind of thing. But she had boys and girls displaying the same behaviors, but she was giving the boys a lot more leniency. The girls were getting a lot more BIRs, and therefore, intervention from her regarding it. So it was very interesting to look at the data, boil that down, see where it was coming from, and then to kind of change the practices, change how we're responding, change how we're preventing those things from going on. So very interesting.
Ashley, I can't imagine that was easy, because what you've just described so very nicely was a bias.
Yes.
And a bias against girls.
Yes.
And when we look at our BIR data, it's really, I'm imagining, easier to talk about incidents such as mealtime or what's happening in the block area or things like that. But I can't imagine how difficult it is when you see the alert come out, a disproportionality alert, and you observe and you actually see bias in the classroom. How do you handle that? What do those conversations look like?
I would say, first of all, I have to credit our wonderful coaches, because I am the school counselor and I have now I have one coach, but we used to have two coaches who really helped in these conversations. We would partner together with the data, and we would consult and they would do some direct coaching. So we were a team. So first of all, I want to give everybody credit for that. It's not just me alone, but I would say those are the really challenging conversations. And like you said, it's not in my nature to say, oh, this is what's wrong, we need to address it. So I think I've had to develop some ways to do that too. And so for me, I try to really focus on, hey, this is going great, as we all do, the little sandwich thing, But then I come at it, I kind of changed, I took my mindset as, I'm going to come at this like I come at with teaching the kids, with teaching them social skills or emotional competencies, or saying, hey, this is going great. How can we use this strength to work in this area right here? And that seems to have really worked for me. To say things like, hey, I see this going on. This is really tough. I get it. Let's see what we can do to come up with some prevention strategies. Or, I don't want you to keep having to experience all this challenging behavior during transitions. Let's see if we can change it up. Let's flip it up. Let's make it easier on the kids and on you too. So I really think kind of framing it that way, like, let's do something silly and crazy and out of the box maybe, but let's try to just flip things up and see what happens and make it easier for the children and easier for the teaching staff as well. So that's not like exactly a specific example, but that's just kind of the mindset I try to take, the framework I look at it with. And I feel like people tend to be pretty receptive to that.
Actually, I was thinking about culturally responsive practices and some of the things that I was able to see at your center. And one day I came to visit to observe, and I was really taken by two new children who had started that week. And you and Danielle told me that you had two new students who did not speak English. I think one spoke French and one spoke Spanish. And when I went to observe the classroom, I could not tell who those new children were. I was just amazed that they were so integrated in the classroom without knowing English. Do you remember that?
I do.
Tell us how you did that, because it was truly amazing.
I remember specifically, I'm thinking about the little girl who spoke French. She was from, I believe, the Congo. And yeah, I think it may have been her very first day when you came.
Yes.
It may have been her very first day. But I have to really credit the teacher, because it's kind of it is a school-wide goal of ours to just really make things feel welcoming and like a family, not just for the students, but for the parents and the families and as they come in. So I see that in her classroom as well. So she had already done a talk with the kids. Oh, we have a new student coming, and she does a wonderful job of teaching the kids how to welcome each other, how to make new friends feel welcome, what can we do to help. And one of the things that she implemented that I really think helped with this particular student is she just so happened to have another student in the classroom that spoke French and was also from Africa. And I don't believe it was the same country, but they did both speak the same language. So she set up a buddy system. They sat by each other on the carpet. The other student that spoke French would do a little translating when necessary, which was great. She was a very mature 4-year-old. We were lucky with her. She was a wonderful peer model. But not only with that, was they were buddies through the day. So the I'll call her the older student. She's not really older, but the older student, she took the child around. She was tasked with, you're going to teach our new friend how to play in centers. How can we do that? Helping her come up with some ideas. And okay, let's teach her how we do small group. Let's teach her how we do this. And so I think that use of a peer model and a peer buddy system is what made it seamless, because it wasn't like the child was walking around lost all day and teachers having to point her in this direction and that. She had a buddy who was very willing and happy to do it, and just made her feel welcome in that classroom. And thinking about that classroom, I had the same experience this year, 3 or 4 years later, where I had a new student coming in, and it just warms my heart to hear them all, hi, so-and-so, and welcome, and we're glad you came to play. And just the language and the way they approach it, I think, makes it seamless, whether that child speaks the language or not. It would look the same. So.
And it's really a testament to the amazing practices, the implementation of practices at that universal level. So many times we talk about developing authentic and positive, supportive relationships, and we think about that from adult to child. We don't always think about it and support and enhance those practices that are between peers, or even between family members and between each other as well. So you've described that perfectly in the way that you implemented it. So we were talking about the BIR and identifying targets for training, where training should take place. And we were talking about how touchy or sensitive it can be when you've noticed bias, and just telling us how you handle that and how those conversations take place.
Wonderful. I think one thing that we've really learned from pyramid model, one of our biggest takeaways, is the bottom of the pyramid, the relationships. And those relationships, especially relationships in all facets, are extremely important, because they're how we relate to each other. It's how we see the world in the context of our relationships. And when you have supportive relationships built, when I have supportive relationships built with the teachers I work with and the other staff members, it's easier to have those difficult conversations. The element of trust is there. We can have those conversations, and they're non-judgmental. And, sometimes it's me just reflecting what I saw in the classroom to the teacher and giving them the opportunity to pause and reflect. And using the data to support that, because the data is very objective, and it's not my perspective on what I'm seeing in the classroom. This is what we're seeing from the BIRs. Let's talk about it. And when that relationship is established, that conversation flows back and forth, and really wonderful things can come from it.
That is the beauty of BIR. That's the beauty of collecting data. It's not subjective. You have it here, and it's showing us based on what we've reported ourselves. So what do we do? And I love the way that you tied that back to the bottom of the pyramid, because without those relationships, then no learning will occur.
then nothing can happen.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we even see it with families. We have put in so many things, preventative strategies to meet with our families so many times frequently early in the year, because we want that relationship to be established. Because if we have to have a conversation about challenging behavior, you need to know that we love and care and want to support you and your child. And we are having this conversation not because we're here to blame anyone, but how can we get together and how can we put strategies in place to support each other and ultimately to benefit your child.
That is wonderful. So I'm talking to our participants now. We've had one question. I'd love to hear from you all. First, questions about anything that we've covered so far, but also how have you all on the call addressed implicit bias when it has become very noticeable in your environment? There are 5 questions on the queue. Let me see, I don't see them. Hold on.
Rosemary, let me give you the first question here from Danielle Norton. She says she works with Ashley at Cambridge. And Danielle says, my question is, how did conversations go with teachers when trends and patterns of BIRs indicate changes need to be made in teachers' practices to support children?
Okay, Ashley and Raquel.
I can start with that one first. I think sometimes when we look at the BIR, I sometimes like to start with the individual child data, because I think sometimes it's easier for adults to swallow. They feel, okay, that's the problem the child is having, and it's not something that's coming directly from my classroom. But then as we put supports in place to benefit that individual child, we see that that one change has benefited everyone in the classroom. So kind of depending on how we tackle the issue and how we talk about it, can make the teacher really open to say, oh, I see this child is making improvements. And as soon as you just make a little bit of an improvement, teachers really buy in, and then they want to do more and they want to learn more. Oh, that strategy really worked. Let's talk about this part of the day. Help me out with transitions. And you kind of see it builds positive momentum that way.
I totally agree, Raquel. I see it as a bit of a snowball effect as well. And I think one standard line I like to use a lot that just fits perfectly with how you describe doing it yourself is, well, we know it will probably help so-and-so, but it couldn't hurt the rest of them either.
Yeah.
And that is usually a way to be like, well, that's true. Okay, we'll try this. And if that helps with so-and-so's problem behavior. But then, as you said, once we implement, we see, oh, wow, that helped with a lot of littler things too that maybe hadn't escalated up to this point yet, but they could have. So I really agree with you, Raquel. I think that is such an important point that, yeah, we start here and then we see it grow. They get excited. Things change with other kids. We want to try something new. Ooh, we got this time of the day. It's working great. Let's go on to that second bar on our graph. We handled transitions. Ooh, centers is next. Yeah, it gets some excitement going.
Absolutely. And I'd just like to give a shout out to Danielle Norton, who was part of the team with Ashley, and some of the stories that we're telling. She was right there, and we were working together to look at our BIR data, to talk about targeted training, and to really help support that team, especially the leadership team as they begin to grow.
Yes.
We have another question from, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but Tribla Bennett. And she asked, how can I get started with the BIR and the pyramid model at my facility? This is her very first webinar.
Welcome. It's very exciting. You are definitely in the right spot. My first recommendation is really to explore challengingbehavior.org, the website that was shared earlier in the presentation. There is a ton of resources there in the resource library to give you more information about program-wide implementation. Also, definitely access the BIR training webinar in the instruction packet. Start there. That'll give you the background knowledge on the BIR system, and just read. All the handouts are there, so anything you really need is found in the resource section for program-wide implementation.
And also there is a BIR webinar coming up this month. So please go to the NCPMI website to take a look at that. And the materials on the website are amazing. And also, I'm not sure what state you're in, but I believe that there are only 12 states that are not using pyramid model. So you may want to do a little research and find out what your state is doing and see how you can connect with people who are implementing the pyramid model. So our next question, and I do want to say thank you so much for joining the webinar. And this is your first one. I hope you're enjoying it. What we want more than anything is for this to be interactive and participatory. So we appreciate the questions and the feedback. So Denise, I'm sorry, there is Melissa Murray who asked about national and state level BIR data. We don't have national and state level data yet. I do hope in the future, I won't say the near future, but I do hope that we will be able to pull these data together so that we can get a picture of what's happening around the state. Let's see our next question. Our next question is from Denise Blair. If there are multiple incidents a day with one child, can the incidents be summarized on one BIR document, or is it necessary to write one BIR for each incident?
I can answer that question. I feel like I review this every year just to make sure we're doing it correctly. So that is a good question, and I do get that a lot from the teachers that I work with as well. So we were taught that, and you will hear this if you do the online BIR training that Raquel was talking about, that if there's no break in the incident, if it's prolonged, then it's one BIR. But if the child can settle between each one and it's not just a prolonged tantrum that basically never ended, then you do more than one. You feel like a broken record, but that's going to give you the best data and the most complete picture of the child. I think a good example would be beginning of the year. You always have at least a few children that have inconsolable crying. It's their first time away from mom. And that is an example of something that could last for a couple hours and maybe only be one BIR because the crying really never stopped. But let's say we have another child in the class. He was upset when he dropped off. He did a little bit of acting out, maybe some physical aggression, but calmed down, had breakfast, did morning meeting, but then amped back up again in center time, didn't like how somebody else had the toy he wanted. Maybe he did some snatching or hitting to try to get it. That would be two. So it may be over the same time span, but that's two very distinct incidences rather than one that just kind of kept on going.
Mm-hmm.
Well
Wonderful.
said,
thank you. So Lisa asked, and I think it's in relation to the response about the little girl who was a buddy with a person who spoke the same language. Lisa wants to know how you support families who speak a language other than English if you don't have someone at your school who speaks that language.
Well, I can answer that too. And I'm sure Raquel, please chime in with me because I know you have answers to this too. Yes. So I said we have 5 languages on staff, but last year in our small little school, we had 14 plus languages within the students and families. So definitely did not have every language on staff to be able to communicate with every family. So for us, we do the best we can. We are lucky. We are in a large metropolitan school district, so we do have a interpretation and translation department. So every document that we can get to them ahead of time to be translated into different languages, we do. It's not, we can't get every language, but we try our best for what's available. When it comes to things like parent meetings and parent-teacher conferences, again, we try to schedule these things as far out as we can to have either someone in person or on the phone through the translation department that is able to help us to best communicate with that family. And Rosemary, I like how you brought up with the children. So when it comes peer-to-peer, kids are amazing. They can communicate just beyond, I think, even what we can ever even teach and show them. But I have found that nonverbals are huge. So using visuals, even, of course, we as teachers use them with the students, but even peer-to-peer. And that is a huge part of the pyramid model, as everyone who is going to explore and who has explored challengingbehavior.org will see, even when it comes to social skills, initiating play, trading, it's all there in visual form. So I think visuals are huge. Even if we're doing a buddy system and we don't speak the same language, we can still do it.
Yes.
Communicate in a different way.
Raquel, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Ashley, I totally agree. Clifton is also a very diverse area. I believe there's over 30 different languages spoken in the city of Clifton, and very, very diverse. We do have access to staff members that speak a variety of languages. But like you said, sometimes there's not, there might not be someone who speaks Gujarati in our program currently. And we might have a student that speaks Gujarati and their family does too. So what do? Try to build those relationships early so that the family feels comfortable. Maybe they can bring a translator to a meeting as well, and that's completely acceptable for our purposes. And then if teachers, we really try to do daily homeschool communication, again, to cement the relationship, for parents to feel comfortable about what's happening at school. So the teachers have actually been taking pictures of students working in the areas, or if they made something wonderful in the area, they'll just send home the picture.
That's nonverbal with an adult. I love it.
Exactly. So a picture's worth 1,000 words, and then that parent can have that conversation with their child in their home language. Tell me about what you did at school today. And again, it just cements that school is a positive place and that we can continue having those conversations at home.
Awesome. It's so funny. I was observing a school today, and there was a young lady, a little girl about 4, who knew I didn't speak Spanish very well. And it was amazing to me that she took me around the classroom to teach me everything in Spanish. It was just truly incredible. And I love that peer interaction. And also, Ashley, you said something that reminded me of a workshop I went to about 2 months ago. And they were talking about culturally responsive practices. And they had panelists from all over the world, basically. And one guy was representing the Somali community. And he said it breaks his heart when he notices that people go out of their way to translate materials into Somali. And I don't know if that's the name of the language, but for the Somalis. And he said that because so many Somalis are not literate, that because of the infrastructure and because they were refugees and because of the government, they were not allowed to go to school. There were no schools for a couple of generations. So they don't have the capacity to read and write, even in their own language, does not exist. Is that powerful? And he said the way to connect to Somali families were to come in or call them in and speak. So rather than translating materials, is to have a Somali speaker come in and talk to them. And it's just amazing. And it takes me right back to the first level of the pyramid. It's really finding out what the families need. Because we don't always know. That was a huge shock. I do want to say that it's very important. And I made sure that he really talked about this, that it's not that Somalis don't have the capacity to read and write, because they're brilliant people. They just didn't have the opportunity to learn because of the schools.
Yeah, that makes me think one thing our teachers do on the Get to Know You Child sheet is ask the family what language they prefer to receive information in. So that because we've run into that with Kurdish speaking families. Again, coming from a war-torn area, a lot of people didn't have the opportunity to go to school. So they speak in Kurdish, but they prefer to read in English.
Oh, how interesting.
I didn't even thought about that till you brought that up. So
yes, we learned so much from our families. And again, that's practicing that cultural humility. Earlier, I asked the question about implicit bias, and we have a couple of responses. One is Danielle said, the way that she handles implicit bias is really looking at herself on a very regular basis. Things going on in society today has absolutely heightened possible tendencies for implicit bias. It's a constant reflection and transparency, and that is so powerful and so very true. So thank you, Danielle, for that. And then I have Trebla said that she's in Georgia. And Trebla, I am not sure if Georgia is a pyramid model state, but if you go on the NCPMI website, I believe that information is there. If not, you can also go to the Pyramid Consortium and you'll find that information as well. And Cassandra said she provides technical assistance to providers. Most are in family child care homes. Is the BIR something that can be used to introduce to providers in that setting? What do you think, Ashley and Travela?
I feel like you could. It would kind of depend on the in-home provider as well. If it was an in-home provider that had specific times, like at this time of day we go outside to play, at this time of day we have a meal, at this time of day we play with toys, I think it could work because you do have different settings. So at least in that aspect, it would allow you to look at different settings. It would allow you to look at the gender and the ethnicity piece of implicit bias. It might look a little different how you looked at it, but I think it's something that could provide useful information.
Ashley, I totally agree. I think it is something that is invaluable. And when you talk about, do they have a predictable schedule and routine?
Important anyway, right?
If they don't, it might be set, it might be something to say, all right, let's talk about a schedule. How can we increase predictability within the daily routine so all kids know what's happening and they know what's happening next? That alone can substantially reduce challenging behavior.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Vanessa, I'm sorry. Oh no, this is an anonymous attendee. They've started program-wide implementation, but they're not using the BIR. How critical is it that they will be using the tool to support the program and implement with fidelity?
I honestly think it's an absolutely critical component. I could not imagine pyramid implementation without using the BIR. And from a coach's standpoint, I would find it so difficult to support my teachers in classrooms without having that data. So for me, the BIR is the first thing I look at before I go into a class to familiarize myself, where might be the areas that I need to focus on.
Yeah, I agree. And as someone who was using Pyramid before I began using BIRs, I just found it made everything so much more concrete. And I think we were talking about having that concrete data, and it kind of takes it takes the not bias. It makes it not as personal to just have this data rather than see, oh, I noticed this when I come into your class, but to say, hey, the data is showing me that X, Y, and Z is happening. So it makes it more concrete, and I think it makes it more workable. So I have found it invaluable. It has really helped me to help the teaching staff I work with.
Yes. So as we begin to wrap up, thank you so much. Vanessa asked, is this program implemented in middle school and does it work? Because she has a student that gets in trouble every single day and rewards aren't working. And Vanessa, I want to refer you to the PBIS website and to Kent McIntosh's work. He's doing something very, very similar that is targeted towards older children. So I don't have the website here, but he's out of the University of Oregon. It's pbis.org. I just got a message. So please, Vanessa, go to pbis.org and you'll find tons of information in a very similar program to the BIR. I am so excited to have been able to visit with all of you today. And Ashley and Raquel, you have been phenomenal in really sharing what works to reduce suspensions and to reduce the disproportionality associated with them. I appreciate you both and the work that you're doing. And now I'm going to turn this over to Sarah, who can give us further information.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for their wonderful insights, and thank you to our participants for their comments and questions. I want to share a few bits of information before we conclude this webinar. First of all, the data that we collect from our webinars via your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar by typing in the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. The certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. I also want to invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org. Here you can sign up for our upcoming webinars. As Rosemary mentioned, we have a webinar on the BIR coming up in December. You can access recordings of all of our past webinars, including this one, and you can download pyramid model resources from our resource library. I want to thank you all for participating in our webinar today. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar happen. This concludes our webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.